Here's two truths. Americans love zombies, and this video is not going to end well. We go through phases of being infatuated with zombie media, games, movies, books, but zombies as a genre kind of suck. I mean, it's hard to do right, especially for long. Most writers don't even care to tell you where the biters come from in the first place, and if they do, the explanation is not as interesting as you hope it to be. Even in The Walking Dead, the most you get is we all turn at the end of season 2 and Robert Kirkman saying space rocks. But let's talk about Robert Kirkman's creation. The Walking Dead is a monument to the zombie genre, starting off as a graphic novel and then turning into a critically acclaimed show, at least for a while. The graphic novel did finish with a stellar and satisfying ending in my opinion, but the show still goes on. The highs were high and the lows were the pits of hell for The Walking Dead. The Walking Dead will go down as the most successful zombie franchise to imitate. That's why AMC is trying to ride it until the wheels come off with 2 different spin-offs and some Rick Grimes movies apparently. But the final season of the show has been announced, with the ratings dwindling since season 7. Honestly, this came much later than expected. The Walking Dead started off with so much promise. What the show offered ended up being too much of a crutch or hindrance later. Great production quality, a frightening zombie threat, and anyone could die at any time. No one was safe. All 3 of these factors changed in some way. The Walking Dead still looks like The Walking Dead, but the cinematic feel from season 1 compared to season 6 is entirely different. Walkers are often a secondary threat instead of primary post season 4. Too many people die. The rotation of the cast became too fast. Too many new faces. You became jaded about the character deaths, especially when it felt like the core group, Rick, Michonne, Maggie, Carol, Daryl, Carl, Glenn, were virtually untouchable regardless of the danger. Which is weird to say because 2 of those characters I just named are dead in the show, 3 if you count Rick. But Rick isn't actually dead. Carl is alive in the comic. He was killed due to Chandler Riggs turning 18, and they faked Glenn's death with Dumpstergate in season 6 to have him killed at the beginning of 7. So minus Glenn, in which they definitely screwed up his story, this does feel untouchable. The Walking Dead is not bad due to production quality, the actors, or even its rinse and repeat formula. The Walking Dead is bad because its relationship with the source material. You've heard it before. The book is better than the movie. In this case, it's the graphic novel is better than the show, and it is. They had to find a way to separate itself from the comic counterpart. The writers quickly found themselves in a dilemma. Following the source material worked, but the comic was ahead of the show, so there were many who knew what was coming next, so they had to shake it up a little to keep things exciting, adding brand new characters, brand new plot lines, and modifying character deaths. But this drive to be different is ultimately what led to the show's downfall, and it took a long time to occur. The showrunners should be extremely happy about what they accomplished and got away with, but at the beginning of season 7, that's when the show dies. No, I'm not mad that they killed my favorite character, Glenn. I knew that was coming 2 years prior when I had read the comic, and my favorite character actually is Rick Grimes, surprisingly. The beginning of season 7 just highlights everything bad with The Walking Dead. So let's talk about that lineup one last time and why it doesn't make any sense. In the comic, Kirkman is all about symbolism. Characters' deaths always have meaning. They are not a means to advance the plot, but are significant exclamation points to a violent, continuously evolving story. Glenn and Abraham's deaths are meaningless to the show. They're tragic, but they're meaningless. Abraham overstayed his welcome in the show, and they found a way to get rid of him in the lineup. The only thing you really get out of Negan bashing his brains in is the fact that he was thinking about actually living instead of surviving due to his near-death experience. Even the effect on Eugene is short-lived because he ends up loyal to Negan when he's taken hostage, instead of the opposite, in which he remains loyal to Rick and manages to escape. His character arc completely shifts. Glenn's death is meaningless because Glenn is no longer the sacrificial lamb. In season 6, episode 12, Glenn and Heath gun down a bunch of saviors, essentially in cold blood. This eliminates Glenn as the sacrificial lamb that he is in the comics. He kills walkers, but never people. This moment is so tragic in the comics, when Glenn is chosen to die because everyone in the group literally knows he is the most innocent of them all. Everything he has done has always been in self-defense and with a good moral compass. The show spoils this by having him kill saviors in cold blood, and it's spoiled again because both of them die in a lineup purely for shock. The good news was that Jeffrey Dean Morgan was going to be fantastic as Negan. The bad news was that episode 1 of season 7 had a viewer audience of 17 million, and it never hit that number ever again. Ratings are currently at season 1 numbers. It wasn't just the hyper-violence and shock that turned people off. It was a moment where people finally got fed up with the writing of The Walking Dead. Now, some of you are just Glenn fans and you just no longer watch the show, but it doesn't end there either. There's another 3 seasons worth of mistakes, but let's stay focused on the lineup. Let's talk about payoff. Payoff is watching Avengers Infinity War and then waiting a year to watch Avengers Endgame. The snap versus the portal scene. Good television, critically acclaimed television must understand and accept the idea of the payoff. At the end of season 6, the lineup happens and someone dies and it's a cliffhanger. This was the beginning of the end. A year later, you get your payoff. You're able to see who dies, but you get more than you expected in a bad way. But this isn't the payoff I'm actually talking about. The payoff is what happens to Negan and how the all-out war arc ends. The comics. Glenn dies, Negan rules, Rick has a plan, war starts, Rick spares Negan, war over. The sequence is nearly identical for both the comic and the show. However, one makes a good comic, the other makes bad TV. Why? Meaning and payoff. This was an absolutely critical time for the show to deviate from the comic. If you're going to deviate, don't half-ass it. Commit. The showrunners expected to deviate from the source material, but have an ending similar to the source material. That doesn't actually make a lot of sense. Negan needed to die in the show, and he didn't likely because they liked Jeffrey Dean Morgan too much, which I understand, but hear me out. If you're gonna deviate, don't half-ass it. Allow me to fix the end of season 8 for you. Abraham and Glenn still get the bat. Carl is dead because you can't really do anything about Chandler Riggs turning 18, I guess. Rick Grimes gets the upper hand on Negan and slits his throat. Rick tells City to save Negan. This is important for Rick's character. They got this right in the show. His mercy does prevail over his wrath. Rick Grimes is growing as a leader. However, Daryl is another story. Daryl is the reason why Glenn gets killed. He is upset at himself. He is sad for Maggie. He wants Negan dead. Daryl, being the right-hand man of Rick, is not too far away, beats City to the punch, and proceeds to beat Negan with his own bat, killing him. Negan finally pays for his crimes. The suffering you endured in the lineup has been met with revenge. Payoff. Rick Grimes ultimately spares Negan, growing as a leader even after all of this bloodshed. He allows the death of his son to change his mind, meaning Daryl's wrath prevails over his mercy, continuing to drive the "you're my brother, but I don't quite agree with you" wedge in between Rick and Daryl that would get exploited in the following season anyway, meaning my point in this alternate universe is that there was a way, even with the deviation from the source material, to give the viewer meaning for the storylines built, but also payoff. Between the lineup and how the arc ended, this is where the show dies. The excessive character deaths, the storylines, the hyper-violence. Every flaw with The Walking Dead is highlighted, and those 16 of 17 million viewers never come back. Potentially you disagree with me about how season 8 should have ended. What I'm saying isn't gospel here or anything, but just consider this. Season 2, episode 12. Rick kills Shane. The amount of buildup, the greatness in the scene is due to the deviation from the source material. The Rick-Shane encounter does occur in the comics, but it's not on a comparable level to the show. It's a heartbreaking showdown between two brothers. This is the defining moment for Rick Grimes in the show. In the comics, it feels more like a hiccup in the road of violent travels. In the show, it's a turning point for Rick Grimes. It's 2 seasons worth of buildup between 2 characters, not something that occurred in a couple of panels in Robert Kirkman's graphic novel. And that's not to shade Robert Kirkman. It was fine then when he did it, but when the showrunners got a hold of this scene and just turned it into something completely different, that's how you get a fantastic scene. And that's the difference of knowing when to deviate and when to commit, because it went from Shane being an absolute nobody in the Walking Dead comic to Shane being a core part of the entirety of the Walking Dead, which is why you can get the ghost of his character to come back in following seasons. Deviation with meaning. Deviation with a payoff. Sure, true deviation would have been not killing Shane at all, but keeping him alive into the second season was definitely different, and it definitely impacted the series. And if you're a true Walking Dead fan, you know that the first 4 seasons of the show feels entirely different from everything else that occurred beyond that. The Walking Dead is bad. I've loved this show for an extremely long time, but this show was bad. And I will be one of the 1 million viewers who watches this show, maybe even 2 million viewers when the final season occurs, because Andrew Lincoln will be back to reprise his role as Rick Grimes, and I'm very interested to see how they will potentially adapt the fantastic ending that Robert Kirkman wrote. But for now, the show was bad, and COVID's still going on, so we'll see when it airs. Thanks for joining me on an extremely long Black Man's Log.